An Apache woman asked a lonely rancher for work. His sunset marriage deal shocked her. Jake Donovan had lived alone on his cattle ranch for more years than he cared to count. The sun was beginning to set over the barren desert, casting a golden glow across the land. It was a quiet evening, the kind that made a man feel the weight of the world on his shoulders. The wind whispered through the dry grass as he worked, his hands steady but tired from a long day of labor. Most people had no reason to come this far into the desert, and Jake preferred it that way. He'd always been a solitary man, keeping to himself, focusing on the land and the cattle. His life had been hard, full of loss, and the days seemed to stretch on forever, one after the other, with little change. But this evening was different. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Jake heard the sound of hooves in the distance. He squinted into the fading light, trying to make out the figure riding toward him. The rider was a woman cloaked in a long, dust-covered coat, her silhouette framed by the last light of the day. Jake stood still, unsure of who she was or what she wanted. Few strangers came to his ranch, and even fewer traveled through the desert. He set down his tools and walked toward the gate. As she drew closer, he could see she was riding a strong, sturdy horse, and her face was set with determination. When she reached the gate, the woman dismounted, her movements graceful and confident. She didn't seem like a person who would be easily intimidated, even by the vast emptiness of the land. Her skin was a warm bronze, her hair dark and braided tightly against her head. She wore a simple dress, rough from travel, but there was something about her that caught Jake's attention immediately. She had the eyes of someone who had seen much in life, eyes that spoke of hardship, loss, and survival. "You need something, ma'am?" Jake asked, his voice rough from a day's work. The woman nodded, her face calm but tired. "I'm looking for work," she said. "I've traveled a long way, and I need a place to stay, even if just for a while." Jake studied her for a moment. There was something about her that felt different from the usual travelers. She didn't seem to be asking for charity, just a chance to prove herself. And that intrigued him. "Where are you from?" he asked, still cautious. He wasn't one to trust easily, not since the old days. "I'm Apache," she said, her voice steady. "I left my people some time ago. They didn't go well for me, and I need to find my own way." Jake frowned, still unsure about her. The Apache were a proud people, and many settlers didn't trust them. He had his reasons for keeping a distance from anyone tied to the Apache, but something about this woman made him hesitate. "You can stay for a few days, help out around here," Jake said, finally breaking the silence. He figured a few days of work wouldn't hurt anyone, and maybe she'd earn her keep in that time. Her eyes brightened with gratitude, and she nodded. "Thank you," she said quietly, before adding, "I'm Tala." "Jake," he replied shortly. "Come on inside. I'll show you where you'll be staying." Tala followed Jake into the ranch house, a modest wooden structure with a porch that overlooked the fields. Inside, the house was simple but clean, with a large hearth at the center of the main room. There wasn't much in the way of decoration, but it was comfortable in its own way. Tala set down her things and looked around. She was tired from the long ride, but she felt a sense of relief at being inside. The air was cooler here, and the smell of earth and firewood was comforting. "I can start right away," she said, turning to Jake. "What needs to be done?" "I need help with the cattle. Got a few things to fix around here, too." "You know how to handle horses?" Tala nodded. "I do. I grew up with them." "Well, good," Jake said. "Let's start with the cattle tomorrow, and we'll see what else needs fixing." As Jake turned to leave, Tala spoke again. "I'll be grateful for any work you offer, but I don't want to be a burden." Jake stopped in his tracks. There was something about her words that made him stop and think. Most people, when they were in need, would beg or offer excuses. Tala wasn't doing that. She was simply asking for a chance. "You won't be a burden," Jake said, his voice softer than before. "Get some rest. You've had a long journey." The sun finally disappeared, leaving a blanket of stars above the ranch. Jake stepped outside onto the porch, looking out at the land. It was a lonely existence, but it was all he had. He had lived on this ranch for so long it felt like a part of him. But tonight, something felt different. Maybe it was Tala's quiet strength, or the way she had spoken without asking for pity. He turned his gaze to the sky. In a world so harsh, it was rare to find someone who didn't just want something, but was willing to work for it. Tala's presence wasn't just a change in the air. It was something deeper. Something Jake couldn't quite explain, but he felt it, like a thread pulling him closer to something he had been running from for years. He glanced over his shoulder at the darkened house where Tala was resting. Tomorrow, the work would begin. But Jake knew there was more to this than just cattle and repairs. There was a story here, a story that had yet to unfold. The next morning, the air was cool with the promise of another hot day ahead. Jake woke early, as he always did, before the sun had fully risen. The work on the ranch never stopped, not even for a moment. He stretched his stiff muscles and glanced over at the bed where Tala had slept. She was already gone. Jake wasn't surprised. He figured she'd be out there ready to work like the rest of them. He grabbed his hat and walked out onto the porch, where the sun was beginning to rise over the horizon. The light bathed the land in golds and oranges, making the desert seem almost peaceful for a brief moment. Tala was standing by the barn, her back to him as she brushed down one of the horses. Her movements were smooth, practiced, like she had done this her entire life. Jake watched her for a moment, noticing the way she carried herself with confidence and ease. He hadn't expected much from her the day before, but now he could see the strength in her. The way she handled the horse, the way she moved, it was clear she knew what she was doing. She wasn't like the others who came through looking for something more than work. She was here for one thing, survival. "Morning," Jake called out, breaking the silence. Tala turned and smiled, a warm, genuine expression that made her seem softer, despite the roughness of her journey. "Good morning," she replied. Her voice was steady, calm, and it brought an odd sense of comfort to Jake. He nodded toward the cattle pens. "We've got a few things to do today. I'll show you where we keep the feed and get started." She followed him without hesitation, the sound of their boots crunching in the dry earth. Jake couldn't help but notice how quiet she was. She didn't ask questions like others often did. She simply observed and worked. Maybe it was the solitude of this place that made people different, or maybe it was something else about her. The day passed slowly, filled with the routine tasks of ranch life. Tala proved herself more than capable, handling the cattle as though she had done it all her life. Jake watched her work, impressed by her strength and skill. But there was something else he noticed, something deeper. There was a quiet sadness in her eyes, a shadow that hung over her like a cloud. By midday, the sun was high in the sky and the heat was unbearable. Jake wiped the sweat from his brow, glancing over at Tala. She didn't seem bothered by the heat, working as if it were just another part of the day. "You handle this better than most," Jake said, wiping his forehead again. "I didn't expect you to be so good with the cattle." Tala smiled, but it was a small, almost sad smile. "I grew up with them. It's all I've known." Jake nodded, but he didn't press for more. There was something in her words, something that spoke of a life far different from his own, a life of struggle, loss, and survival. As the day wore on, they took a break in the shade of the barn. Jake leaned against the wall, watching Tala drink from a canteen. The silence between them was comfortable, but there was an unspoken tension, something neither of them could avoid. After a few moments, Jake spoke. "You never said why you left your people." Tala lowered the canteen, her eyes downcast. She took a deep breath as if gathering the strength to speak. "I didn't leave them willingly. There was a war, a conflict, and I lost everything. My family, my tribe. It was either stay and watch them die, or leave and try to survive on my own." Jake could hear the pain in her voice, even though she tried to hide it. The feeling he had lost a lot in his life, too. But it was different for him. He had his ranch, his cattle, his solitude. Tala had nothing but the clothes on her back and the hope that someone would give her a chance. "I'm sorry," Jake said quietly, his voice sincere. "I didn't mean to pry." Tala nodded, taking another sip from the canteen. "It's fine. I don't talk about it much, but I don't mind telling you." Jake looked out over the ranch, the wide open spaces that stretched as far as the eye could see. "You know," he said, "I've been here for a long time. Been working this land alone for years. The only company I've had is the cattle and the coyotes." Tala didn't respond right away, but Jake felt her gaze on him. After a moment, she spoke softly. "You're not alone now." Jake looked at her, surprised by the weight of her words. He wasn't sure what to say. It had been so long since he had heard anyone speak with such honesty, with such understanding. Tala wasn't just here for work. She saw him, understood him in a way that no one had in years. They spent the rest of the afternoon working together, the quiet companionship between them growing. By the time the sun began to set, they had finished most of the chores. The ranch was a small world, but it felt a little less lonely with Tala there. As the sky turned pink and orange, Jake leaned against the barn, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Tala stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the same view. The silence between them was no longer awkward. It was comfortable, as if they had both come to understand something without needing to speak it aloud. Jake took a deep breath and turned to Tala. I don't know what it is about you, he said, his voice low. But I feel like I've known you longer than just a few days. Tala met his gaze, her eyes calm, yet there was something in them that mirrored his own feeling of familiarity. Maybe we've both been looking for something. There was a connection between them, something deeper than just work or circumstance, something that neither of them had expected but both of them had felt. The ranch, the cattle, the long days under the sun, all of it seemed distant for a moment, replaced by the quiet understanding that had grown between them. Jake wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in years he felt like it wasn't as lonely as it had been before. The days passed quietly, each one blending into the next. The work on the ranch was steady, the rhythm of daily life becoming familiar to both Jake and Tala. As the sun began to set on the third day of her stay, something shifted between them. It wasn't just the long hours of work or the silence they shared, it was something deeper. They had both been alone for so long, and yet, in this brief time, they had found a strange comfort in each other's company. Jake stood outside the barn, watching the last rays of sunlight stretch across the land. He wiped his brow, feeling the weight of another long day. But this evening he was different. There was a feeling he couldn't shake, a nagging thought in the back of his mind that had been growing since Tala first arrived. He turned to look at her. She was standing nearby, brushing down one of the horses, her movements fluid and graceful. Her dark hair, now loosened from its braid, glimmered in the fading light. There was something about her, something that stirred something deep within him. Jake didn't know what it was, but he couldn't ignore the fact that she had become a part of his life in a way he hadn't expected. She was more than just a worker. She was more than just a stranger who had come to his ranch asking for a job. She had brought something into his life that had been missing for years: connection. Tala finished with the horse and walked over to him, her steps soft against the earth. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there beside him, her gaze on the horizon. The silence was comfortable, the kind of silence that only comes when two people understand each other without words. "You've been thinking about something," Tala said softly, her voice breaking the quiet. "I can see it in your eyes." He had been thinking about it, that was true. In fact, it had been on his mind ever since the moment she arrived. He didn't know why, but it felt right. "I've been thinking about how things are around here," he said slowly. "About how things have been and how they are now." She simply nodded, as though she understood the weight of his words. She had seen it in him, the loneliness that hung around him like a cloud. She had seen it in herself, too. Jake took a deep breath and turned to her, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never been good with words, especially when it came to matters of the heart. But something about the way she looked at him made it feel right. "Tala, I want to ask you something," he said, his voice rough. "Something that might seem strange. But I've been alone for a long time, and you're not like anyone I've met. I've been thinking about this for a while now, and I want you to hear me out." Tala raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She stood still, waiting for him to continue. "I know this might sound, well, like a crazy idea," Jake continued, his words coming slower now, as though he were testing each one before speaking it. "But I want to offer you something. It's not just a job. It's something more, something I've never considered before. I want to offer you a partnership. I can't promise it will be like anything you've ever known, but it's what I can offer. A place here with me as a partner, not just working the land, but building something together." Tala looked at him in silence, her eyes wide, studying his face. She wasn't sure if she had heard him right. A partnership? With him? Was he asking her to stay here with him permanently? Jake took a step closer, his heart racing. "I'm offering you more than just a place to stay. I'm offering you a future. I know it sounds strange, but there's a way we could work this ranch together, and we could have something that neither of us have had in a long time. It's a sunset deal. No strings attached, just an understanding that we're both here for each other, no matter what." Tala's mind raced, her thoughts swirling like a dust storm. A partnership? A marriage deal? She had heard of such things before, but she had never imagined being part of one. She had lived her life in a way that was rooted in her past, in her tribe, in the traditions of her people. But now, in this moment, things felt different. Maybe it was the land, the quiet, or maybe it was Jake's words, so honest and raw. "You mean a deal? A sort of arrangement?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake nodded, his gaze never leaving hers. "A deal," he repeated. "We both know what it's like to be alone. I've been here for years, and I don't want to live the rest of my life like this. You don't have to be alone either. This place, this land, it's enough for both of us. It's not about love, not in the way people expect. It's about survival, about something real." Something simple. She had been running from her past for so long, trying to find a place where she could belong, somewhere she could feel safe. And now, here was Jake, offering her a chance to build something with him. She didn't know if it was the right thing, but she knew she couldn't keep running. Maybe this was what she needed. Maybe this was where she was meant to be. "I'm not asking for anything more than what you're willing to give," Jake said, his voice low. "Just a chance, a partnership. You and me." Tala's heart raced, but she didn't feel scared. She felt something else, a sense of calm. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," she said slowly. "But I know one thing for sure. I don't want to be alone anymore. Not like I've been." Jake's face softened, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of peace. He had never imagined that something as simple as a sunset deal could change his life, but in that moment he realized it could. "Then it's settled," Jake said, his voice filled with quiet certainty. "We'll make it work, Tala." Together. The two of them stood there, side by side, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The world felt still, the air thick with the unspoken understanding between them. They didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time in years, they both felt like they had something worth holding on to. The days after Jake's proposal were filled with a quiet kind of tension, as both Jake and Tala adjusted to the new arrangement between them. It was not a traditional marriage, nor was it a simple partnership. It was something different, something both of them had never expected. And yet, it felt right. The morning after their agreement, Tala was up before the sun, just as Jake had come to expect. She was already in the barn, working with the horses, her hands moving with a practiced ease that Jake couldn't help but admire. The work on the ranch was still as demanding as ever, but now, with Tala by his side, Jake found that the days were a little less lonely. They spent the morning together, working in silence, the only sounds the creaking of the barn doors and the soft thud of hooves against the dirt. Jake couldn't remember the last time he had worked so closely with someone. It wasn't just the work that had changed, it was something deeper. There was a quiet understanding between them now, an unspoken bond that had formed over the last few days. After they finished with the cattle, they took a break under the shade of the oak tree near the barn. Jake had brought them both a couple of mugs of water, and they sat in silence for a while, watching the desert stretch out before them. The air was thick with heat, but it was a comfortable heat, the kind that made the land feel alive. Tala took a deep breath, letting the calm of the moment wash over her. She had never imagined herself here, on this ranch, in this place. She had spent so many years running, searching for something she could never find. But now, as she sat beside Jake, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she had found something worth staying for. "You know," Tala said, breaking the silence, "I never thought I'd end up here. I never thought I'd find a place where I could belong again." Jake glanced over at her, his gaze steady. "You're not alone anymore, Tala," he said quietly. "Neither of us are." Tala nodded, her heart feeling lighter than it had in a long time. The past few days had been a whirlwind, full of unexpected changes, but she couldn't deny that there was something about this place, something about Jake, that made her feel like she had a future again. They spent the rest of the afternoon working together, fixing fences and tending to the animals. As the sun began to set, they found themselves standing in the middle of the field, watching the sky turn shades of pink and orange. The air was cooler now, and a light breeze stirred the dust around them. Tala turned to Jake, her eyes searching his face. "What do you see when you look at this land?" she asked. Jake looked out over the ranch, his gaze distant for a moment. "I see what I've built," he said, his voice low. "It's not much, but it's mine, and it's been enough to keep me going all these years." Tala looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "I see a lot of things," she said. "I see a chance to start over. A chance to build something new, something better." Jake nodded, his heart stirring with a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. Hope. He had spent so many years focused on surviving, on keeping the ranch alive, that he had forgotten what it felt like to dream of something more. But now, with Tala beside him, he was starting to see a future that was no longer defined by loneliness and loss. "Maybe we can build something together," Jake said, his voice quieter now. "Something that's ours." Tala smiled, a small but genuine smile that made Jake's heart skip a beat. "I think we already are." The quiet between them felt different now. It was no longer filled with uncertainty or tension, but with something stronger, a sense of partnership, of mutual respect. They had both been broken by the world in different ways, but now they had found a way to heal together. Over the next few weeks, the bond between Jake and Tala grew stronger. They worked side by side every day, tending to the ranch and building a life together that neither of them had expected. There were moments of laughter, moments of quiet conversation, and moments when neither of them spoke at all. But it didn't matter. They were no longer alone. Jake found himself thinking less about the past and more about the future. With Tala by his side, he could see a way forward, a way to make the ranch prosper, to build something that would last long after they were gone. As the days passed, their agreement grew into something more. It wasn't the kind of love that people talked about in stories, but it was something real, something that mattered. They had both come to understand that love wasn't just about passion or grand gestures, it was about partnership. It was about being there for each other, about building something together, brick by brick. One evening as the sun sank below the horizon, Jake and Tala sat on the porch of the house, watching the sky turn dark. The stars began to appear one by one, filling the night sky with their quiet brilliance. Tala rested her head on Jake's shoulder, the weight of the day lifting from her. She had never imagined that she would find peace in a place like this, with a man like Jake. But here, under the stars, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, a sense of belonging. Jake looked down at her, a soft smile on his face. "You know, I never thought I'd be here either, but I'm glad you're with me." Tala turned her head to look at him, her eyes filled with quiet understanding. "I'm glad too," she said softly. They sat together in the fading light, the sound of the night around them, feeling the warmth of the moment settle into their bones. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it didn't matter. They had each other, and that was enough.